Today I am going to be launching a smear campaign so strong Justin Baldoni will want to hire me. I'm going to be firing shots like Luigi Mangione. Call this video Apple by Charlie XCX because it is rotten right to the core. Just a warning, I am going to be a hater in this video. That's the disclaimer. You have been warned. I just went to see my doctor and he said that my annual case of hateritis is flaring up. And that's because today we are going to be talking about the worst books that I read in 2024. I read 116 books and these were like bottom of the barrel. These were the worst of the worst. I will say quickly, in this video, we are going to be talking about the art, not the artist. We're going to be talking about craft, and ultimately, this is entirely subjective. It's my opinion. You may have loved these books, and that is okay. I mean, I would like to understand what you loved about them. I'm side-eyeing you ever so slightly. That's also okay. You're allowed to disagree. I'm sure you will in the comment section down below. But without further ado, without further procrastination, let's talk about my worst reads of 2024. And we're going to start with a book that is aptly named It Starts With Us, the internet's second favorite Colleen after Wagatha Christie herself, Colleen Rooney. If you have not heard of Colleen Hoover, then you must be living under a rock. Is your name Patrick Starr? Where is this rock? I'd like to join you in there, actually, because you know what? I miss the person I was before I read this book. Not because it changed me in any way. It's just that the time I spent reading this is time I will never recover. It's time I will never ever get back. This is the sequel to It Ends With Us that no one asked for, I think. It ends with us as a kind of brand, and the fact that it even is a brand is problematic in itself. But It Ends With Us has kind of become like the opposite of the Midas touch. Instead of everything it touches turns to gold, it's like everything it touches turns to shit. But at least the original book, It Ends With Us, brought up some interesting moral questions and dilemmas and debates about how to approach art surrounding domestic violence, or also how not to approach art surrounding domestic violence. Specifically, probably don't release a coloring book inspired by your book about domestic violence. That's so insane. I do think that because of her books being so mainstream and so ubiquitous, she has become a kind of easy target for online criticism. This one, my biggest criticism is just like, what was the point of this? It doesn't even really have any controversies. It's just like nothing really happens. My number one nemesis is books that do not need sequels. Books that were so clearly written as standalones that then got really popular and became a brand, as I said before. And so then a sequel just became a cash grab. I've said the same many, many times about Margaret Atwood's The Testament, which is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. I just think that It Ends With Us should have done what it said on the tin. It should have ended. It Starts With Us, to me at least, was very clearly written because of the runaway success of It Ends With Us. This was never planned, I feel, and it shows because there wasn't anything else we really needed to know about these characters. And it's kind of clumsily written too. You could call this book rhinoplasty because it is so on the nose. Lily Blossom Bloom runs a flower shop. She's in love with a guy called Atlas, the same name as the Greek titan known for his strength and endurance. He holds up the world, and she is navigating life since leaving her abusive ex-boyfriend Ryle, who gets riled up. It Starts With Us is a book about the aftermath of leaving an abusive relationship, especially when there is a child involved, which could have been such a powerful and important and groundbreaking narrative, and yet the only groundbreaking is the flaw when I throw this book at it. Because I'm so sick of it. It was rushed, it was clumsily written, it is thoughtlessly written even. I want to find an example. I think this is best exemplified by a conversation that Lily has with Marshall, who is Ryle's best friend. And after the conversation, she's like, oh, that was so nice to speak to someone who knows Ryle like a brother. And I was like, wait a minute. Isn't one of the other characters in the book Ryle's sister? Someone who literally knows him like a brother because he is her brother? Like, oh, it's so nice to speak to Marshall, Ryle's best friend, because he knows Ryle like a brother. If only there was someone else I could have spoken to this entire time. The person I have been speaking to this entire time. She speaks to someone every day who knows Ryle like a brother because she is his sister. I actually think I would rather read the It Ends With Us coloring book than this. I think it would have more substance, more creativity, more literary merit. Please stop churning out sequels to make a quick buck, especially if they suck. That was an accidental rhyme, and that I think has more literary merit than anything in this book. Okay, let's move on. Next, Graveyard Shift. This one hurts. This one, I actually feel an ache in my bones to tell you this, but I really didn't enjoy this one. It's painful for me to say that because I loved ML Rio's previous book, If We Were Villains. That book is immersive, it's clever, it's written in conversation with the dark academia genre, but also Shakespeare. This one is more like a horror novella. It was definitely horrifying, just not necessarily in the way that the author intended. Just the writing. Jump scare, you know? For me, this just totally misses the mark, as in the mark is like several miles away. How do I describe this to you? Imagine Scooby-Doo if there was no talking dog, no discernible plot, and all of the characters spent the whole time smoking. Actually, who am I kidding? Shaggy was smoking like a chimney behind the scenes, I can tell. But in this book, it's a crucial plot point. So basically, there are 5 characters who all go to the local graveyard to smoke. And one day they turn up and there's a massive hole. They are like, well, no one's scheduled to be buried, so who's going to end up in that hole? I was about to say that this book shows hole, but I would actually like to retract that statement. That was an inside head thought that I don't know why I verbalized. The characters stay in touch through a group chat, and ultimately the ending is the biggest anticlimax of all time. There turns out to be a very rational reason behind everything, but I kind of wanted to be spooked. Truly, it is just boring. I fear that Paint would watch this book dry. This book tastes vanilla and goes, oh God, that's a bit much. That's a bit too flavoursome for me. Graveyard Shift makes your most boring, dull friend look like Lady Gaga in the meat dress. It would get a full house on trope bingo, but that's about it, really. Actually, bingo would be more entertaining than this. I would rather play bingo, like 6 rounds of bingo with a group of senile grannies, than read this again. The Graveyard is for me. For my expectations of this book, reading it truly did feel like putting in a shift. And I'm so sad about that. Rebel Rising. I'd actually like to hold up my hands and take accountability for this one because this was my fault for deciding to read this book. I don't know why I did. It was a rainy day. If you're wondering what Rebel Wilson would say in her autobiography, so is she. It turns out there's not a lot. There's not a lot to say. I was in the pits. I was in the trenches of a reading slump, and I wanted something lighthearted and funny to kind of be the perfect antidote to how I was feeling. I listened to this as an audiobook, but it ended up just being surprisingly stale. I guess the most interesting story from this book is the chapter where she just completely cusses out Sacha Baron Cohen. But, and it's like a BBL-sized but, when they published this book, they blocked that bit out. They removed that bit. It's like redacted. I guess because they were worried that he would sue for defamation, which doesn't make me trust many of the claims that are in the book as a result. In the printed edition, I know they did keep the redacted section, as in like it is literally just blacked out. So the chapter is still there, but it is all redacted, which is kind of fun. But also I think the practical reason for doing that is just that there wasn't enough else in the book. So they had to hit the page count somehow. And without that section, does this really have enough substance to be published? You know what I mean? Demi Moore was draining this for life, trying to look for more of the substance. It also features a section where she says that she thinks Adele avoids her because she is fat, which I think Adele has come out and said is just absolutely not true. And if you've read the book and you spent like 300 pages inside Rebel Wilson's mind, and you know, I think that you would understand why people avoid her at parties. And it's nothing to do with the weight. Maybe they should have just redacted the entire thing, honestly. She spends a lot of time telling you that she's a nice and a brave person, but I don't know if all of her anecdotes necessarily prove her point. Listen, you've heard of Rebel Without a Cause, now get ready for a rebel with nothing to say. The Pumpkin Spice Cafe. I read this book in October. I was trying to feel autumnal, and if that is the sole purpose of this book, then that is easily achieved. It's cozy, it's a low-stakes romance, it's set in a small town, everyone knows each other, there's a local book club, everyone goes for meetings in the town hall with the mayor. The vibes are lovely, but that is ultimately all this book is. It's just vibes. It had some great ingredients, it just wasn't cooked right for my tasting. It was underbaked. I felt like I wanted to just shake the author and be like, just slow down. Let's linger for a second. Not every crisis has to be resolved immediately. These people just met. I feel like this is symptomatic of the tropification of literature, largely as a result of book talk. I think this is book talk fodder because you can explain everything that happens in this book within 15 to 30 seconds, but we can do better than this. A girl has inherited the local coffee shop. She falls in love with the local farmer. It's grumpy ex-sunshine, small town romance, found family, blah, 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 blah. To use a term from the title, this book just made me think of a carved out pumpkin, you know, on Halloween. Like, it looks pretty from the outside, but fundamentally, inside, it's hollow. Again, Margaret Qualley is nowhere to be seen because there is no substance. There is definitely spice, though. If that's your thing, we got a whole spice rack going on in here. It's kind of like one of those spice villages. Have you seen those online? It's pretty, but it does contain spice. Enlightenment. I wanted to enjoy this book so badly, but at the 85% mark, I finally did see the light and stopped reading it. Enlightenment was on the long list for this year's Booker Prize, and that's why I picked it up. In fact, it was one of the first books from the list that I started to read because I thought it sounded so great. But it just didn't live up to that expectation I had of it. It's described as this epic story of love and astronomy told over the course of 20 years through the lives of two improbable friends living in Essex. There's a young girl called Grace and an older man called Thomas, and over the course of those 20 years, they find their lives colliding in many different ways. The story is about love and friendship and destiny and religion, and also a 19th century astronomer who is rumoured to haunt a nearby mansion. The book's about small towns, big cities. I just couldn't get into it. The writing style means that we kind of alternate between perspectives. I felt like it was doing so much, but in an untethered way. Like, there are so many tangential details that it's hard to know what to actually cling onto. It's just information overload. And for that reason, I thought it kind of read a bit like a Victorian novel. And I mean that in a derogatory way. That's my least favourite genre of fiction when I studied literature. That was the module I hated the most. Not all books, obviously, from that era are bad, but all bad books are from that era. No, I'm kidding. I'll explain. So basically, during the Victorian era, they were trying to distinguish novels as being separate from poetry. So whereas poetry is very elaborate and whimsical, and there's lots of imagery and symbolism and metaphors, etc., and poems can be sparse with their language, the novel needed to distinguish itself as separate from poetry. And so as a result, the novel featured so many details. The novel was like, we are going to give you everything. Whereas poetry was abstract and feathery, the novel was detailed. And that's what this book does. It is so detailed, but it's hard to know what parts are actual plot points and which parts are just superfluous. I feel like it's not you, it's me. I'm having a heart-to-heart with this book right now. Like, we're gonna have to go and chat by the fire pit and recouple, because I will say that every individual sentence was well crafted. I just found it so convoluted and exhausting to read, and I'll be honest, the juice just wasn't worth the squeeze. There are some absolutely gorgeous lines, but it feels like sifting through sand for hours just to try and find a few pearls. The story was too difficult to follow, the effort to decipher the plot wasn't worth the time, and I think maybe I feel especially negative towards this book simply because it was longlisted for the Booker, and there are so many other books like Martyr and All Fours, which I really believe should have been on that long list, and I loved that long list. This was the only book I didn't really enjoy, and so perhaps more deserving. I don't know. I'm sure this is for somebody. It just certainly isn't for me. Also this year, Kylie Reid said, come and get it. And I said, oh, no, thank you. You can keep it. In fact, what I would like to come and get is a refund or financial compensation, maybe even a written apology. I'm so gutted about this one because I loved Kylie Reid's first book, Such a Fun Age. I have been ranting and raving about how good that book is ever since it came out. And so I couldn't wait to return to Kylie Reid's writing, but this one let me down. We follow a range of people at a university campus. We follow students, teachers, student volunteers, and let me tell you, volunteers were shed. I'm so gutted about this. I can't even tell you. Honestly, for me, I think it was a situation of too many cooks spoil the broth. Like, there were just too many things going on, but no clear strand between them. And I will say I am usually a no plot, just vibes apologist. I don't mind if a book doesn't have a wild, vast, sweeping plot, but while you don't necessarily need a plot, you do need a point. And that's what this was lacking. Trying to find the point of this book was like trying to find Nemo in the desert. And I just think if you read 382 pages of a book and still don't know why it was written, that's a red flag. Do not be mistaken by this green cover. This is a red ass flag. As I said, I'm so devastated about this book. I had such high hopes, such high expectations. It was one of my most anticipated books of the year, but this could fight Katy Perry in a flop-off. Like, who had the biggest flop this year? It's a tough call. Now, before I tell you about the next book, one thing that never lets me down, one thing I am never disappointed by is Squarespace, the sponsor of today's video. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform for building a website or an online brand. And the best news is you don't need to be an expert in web development. You don't need to have a PhD in coding. No, sir. In fact, they have an incredible range of literally hundreds of templates which you can customize. Use them as your perfect starting point. There's also loads of great features. For example, the ability to make a blog or an email sign-up list. Your customers can get flexible payments. All available on Squarespace. And then when you've designed your website, you can use their AI SEO tools to make sure that your website is actually appearing on search results. You can head to squarespace.com right now for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch your beautiful new website, you can use the code jackedwards at squarespace.com/jackedwards to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for working with me on this video. And now, back to the books. Weirdo by Sarah Pascoe. Unfortunately, this book made Madam Web look like Anatomy of a Fall. It made The Pumpkin Spice Cafe look like Shakespeare. There is a specific genre of books I call I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs. These are books usually about kind of quirky millennial women who make mistakes, are stumbling their way through life, and they're endearing and enjoyable. And even though they sometimes say the wrong thing or do morally questionable things, you're rooting for them. That genre has arisen as a direct result of the social expectations put on women and the misogynistic treatment that they receive. It's like a way of saying, up yours, we're going to do what we want. Some authors choose to subvert those expectations in radical ways, like Night Bitch or Milk Fed or Piglet. Others use humor, especially in the wake of the TV show Fleabag, like Green Dot or Greta and Valdin or Big Swiss, who do it really, really well. But the trouble with the humor approach is that it's such a fine line. There are books that land. There are also books that do not land. This book is going to be joining that graveyard of books alongside really good, actually, romantic comedy, fake accounts, like other books that have their place in the Hall of Shame from my previous Worst Books of the Year videos. Unfortunately, this landed in that category for me. I feel like the author read My Year of Rest and Relaxation and Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine and tried to make something there. I don't know. I think the fact that I could compare this book to so many others is part of the issue, because to me, this was the least notable. It's kind of like, you know, when a pop star makes a song that is specifically meant to go viral on TikTok, but it just doesn't work because it's trying to follow a formula and doing it worse. Like, you always have to be reinventing and trying to do something new. This one, I just felt like it's been done and it's not unique. Even the title being Weirdo, it just feels uncool. I don't know how to describe it. I was just sort of cringing a little bit, you know? Every character is annoying and the book feels out of date, even though it's pretty brand new. Character development, don't know her. Plot, missing in action. It does that thing where it names something very specific in order to try to be funny. So instead of saying like, oh, she ate her lunch, it will be like, she ate her prawn sandwich and her packet of skips from her Tesco meal deal. Like, using proper nouns for everything. And after a while, it's just exhausting. This just didn't work for me. And like I said, I couldn't help but compare it to similar books that have done it better. Jillian, unfortunately, this is another book that falls into that same category of books that just didn't land for me, specifically because of their comedy style. I will say that Weirdo is on one end of the spectrum where it's very specifically British humor. Jillian is on the other end where it's very specifically American humor. It's about a quirky, irreverent woman who kind of just hates everyone. She hates her own friends, and she kind of obsessively critiques the actions and behaviors of her co-worker called Jillian. They're total opposites: pessimist versus optimist, nihilistic versus cheerful, abrasive versus charming. And I did think it was fun in the way that it captures that energy of someone just getting completely under your skin. But there's another book that I read this year called The Safe Keep, which did it so well. Whereas this one, I'm not so convinced. Megan, our main character, sort of knows that she's the asshole, but she just doesn't care. For me, I think that I found this book too obvious. I felt like I could see the construction lines. Like, the author was a bit too present on the page. And it also ends in a pretty unsatisfying way, which renders the whole thing just a little bit pointless, because we don't really ever find out what actually happened. And I don't mind an open ending. I don't mind having to sit with the book afterwards and think about what I imagine happened after the narrative ended. But this one I just instantly wanted to forget. This one I wanted to wipe clear from my brain to make space for something else. Like, what childhood memories have I lost because I've remembered what exists of the plot of this book. I liked the author's other book, The New Me, more than I liked this one, but I also didn't really love that. So I think that I probably won't be reading any more of her work. These aren't for me, and that's okay. True Biz is the last book I wanted to speak about in this video. It was another big disappointment, and this one hurts as well because I loved the premise. I just didn't like the execution, as in it made me want execution. It's a book about a school for deaf people, and we follow the POV of the head teacher and 2 of the students. And then also every now and then there's a segment which is kind of about ASL culture, and it's sort of a lesson about ASL. This is very interesting. ASL being American Sign Language. And as someone who studied British Sign Language, this did intrigue me. That's why I picked it up. But it kind of just felt a bit clunky. The moments where it tells you factual information felt a bit tacked on, and they often didn't really have anything to do with the plot of the book. This is kind of 2 different books squished together. It just didn't really make sense in the context of what was happening. So True Biz felt like a true mess. Like, was this a Sophia Richie dance? Because it was messy. And I found out that the term True Biz in America means like, seriously? Really? And I think that's actually an apt title. That's how I felt about this book. Like, seriously? Really? There are definitely ways this could be improved. For example, I would whittle it down from 3 perspectives to 2. I would change it from the third person into the first person so that we can get more distinctive voices, because the sort of free indirect discourse style meant that all of the voices were exactly the same. Like, their tone of voice was exactly the same despite being from different generations, because the free indirect discourse style meant that the tone of 2 characters who are generations apart was exactly the same, and therefore hard to differentiate. Annoyingly, there's a character in this book called Elliot, who I think actually has the most interesting story in the book, and he's literally just a peripheral character. We only find out his story on 1 page near the end. That narrative could have been the whole book. I turned the page wanting more, but not in a complimentary way. Like, I was wanting something that wasn't there. It's such an important subject area. I don't know if this did it justice, and I left my reading experience of this just wishing it was entirely different. And I don't think that's a good sign, if you'll pardon the pun. So those were the worst books that I read in 2024. Do you agree? Have you read any of these? What were your thoughts? Do you disagree? I would love to hear your thoughts on these if you disagree with me. That's amazing. On the flip side, my best books of the year video is also coming. That will be with you very, very soon. So you can subscribe for that if you're new. And I also just uploaded a video where I shared a review of all 116 books that I read over the last year in 1 sentence each. Give or take, mostly give. But thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you for being here. I hope this isn't the worst thing that you watch in 2025, but you know, I'll take the criticism. Let me know in the comment section if there were any books that you just did not vibe with last year. I'd love to read your reviews too. And for now, all the best, stay in touch, have the most wonderful day. I'll catch you very, very soon. Bye-bye.